Good morning and half a day. The Committee on General Government Operation and Appropriations now called to order. Today is Monday, July 17, and the time now is 9 o'clock. In compliance with the Open Government Law, the notice for this public hearing were posted on GovGuam Public Notice Portal KGTF PBS Channel 12 and disseminated via email to all senators and all main media broadcasting outlets on Monday, July 10th and on July 13th. The agenda this morning is on Bill 26-37 COR, Committee on Rules by request of I Magaʹhågan Guåhan, the Governor of Guam, in accordance with the Organic Act of Guam, an act making appropriation for the operation of the executive branch of the Governor of Guam for fiscal year ending September 30, 2024, and making other appropriations and establishing miscellaneous and administrative provisions relative to the Department of Education. At this time, I ask the members of the Department of Education on the panel to please rise while the Sergeant at Arms place you under oath. Everybody stand up.
Please raise your right hand. Under penalty of perjury, you will affirm that any and all information you provide today, whether it be verbally, electronically, and in writing, be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Mr. Chair, you're under oath. You may proceed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sergeant at Arms. The rules of conduct for this budget hearing. Please provide my legislative staff with all documents for photocopying or any documents for photocopying and distribution. Panel members are asked to remain in the room for questions or for additional testimony as may be desired by members of the committee. Question and testimony shall be confined to the substance or nature of the agenda. Personal inference as to the character or the motive of any senator or any individuals testifying is not permitted. Any violation of the general rule of conduct will result in removal from the budget hearing. A proper form and decorum shall be practiced by all present in the public hearing room for these proceedings. Individuals who fail to maintain proper form and decorum will be restricted from participating and will be removed from the room. When you speak, please make sure that the microphone is on and that you speak into the microphone. Please state your name and your title for the record. I'd like to acknowledge my colleagues that have joined me this morning. We have the Oversight Chairman for DOE, Senator Barnett, and to my left, Senator Roy Canata. This morning we have on the panel, we have the chairwoman of the Department of Education Board, Ms. Okada, Dr. Okada, and we have Dr. Swanson, the new superintendent, and welcome to Guam. And may God bless you in your travels throughout Guam. Got 41 schools. And then we have our Frank Cooper nurse, we have Josie Villanueva, we have Jose Sanchez, we have Erica Cruz. We also have the vice chair of the Board of Education, Ms. Maria Gutierrez. Thank you. Thank you all for coming, and we will begin. I know you have a PowerPoint to present, Dr. Swanson, and if you want, you can have Dr. Okada lead the start for the presentation, and then I guess maybe Frank will probably be leading the PowerPoint, or Dr. Swanson, either one. Ms. Okada, Dr. Okada.
Hafadeza Manana Suzu Stoda Samzu. Chairman San Agustin, and of course members of the Committee on Government Operations and Appropriations, to our Oversight Chair, Senator Barnett, and to our esteemed Senator Roy Canata, overseeing Simon Sanchez High School. Sujus Masi for being here this morning. My name is Mary Okada, and I am the chairperson for the Guam Board of Education. I would like to thank all of you for the opportunity to come before you today to testify on behalf of the teachers, the staff, and most especially the students, in support of GDOE's funding requirements for fiscal year 2024. The Guam Education Board recognizes the challenge that is in front of us. We have been closely monitoring and providing some guidance on the steps to get the schools back into compliance. We are poised to support our new superintendent, who has stepped up to the plate to display leadership in completing the requirements needed to move forward. On January 27, 2023, the Guam Education Board approved the request for fiscal year 2024 in the amount of $287,361,750. Subsequent to that, the board approved the amended request to include the funding needed to support the 22% for employees under the general pay plan. This increased the total budget request to $294,506,060. This request submitted will allow the department to move forward in providing an adequate education for our stakeholders. This budget supports the staffing required and the operational requirements. What this budget does not fully contain is the funding needed to support the millions needed to renovate the public schools. However, with the infusion of federal money, specifically CARES and ARP, the department has resources to move the needle in the right direction. However, we must caution that despite having these large sums of money, the department still has challenges to execute the needed repairs and construction at all of the schools. I am also reminded of the phrase, haste makes waste. Given all that has been discussed for the past several months, the board is encouraged to continue to support the superintendent in his responsibility to manage the ship. This ship that I refer to is a partnership which provides the most critical needs to adequately and intentionally support our students. We invite you all to be a partner and to work together to bring updated, adequate, and safe school learning environments for our students to learn. It's time for us to work together, to engage in dialogue, and demonstrate to those that we are providing educational services to that together we are better and stronger. Let's focus on doing what is right for our children. Let's give them a fighting chance. And of course, let's ensure that we are accountable for our actions and lean forward to make it work. Let's build the teams that can make it to the finish line with our focus very clear to ensure student success. I thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee this morning and testify in favor of the fiscal year 2024 budget requests for the Guam Department of Education. I truly believe that we can all work through this together. Our mission focuses on every student to be responsible, respectful, and ready for life. We must all focus on that goal because in the end, and in every step of the way, we owe it to our students. Sedus Maasi, and thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Okada. Dr. Swanson, do you have any opening or any statement you want to make, sir?
Yeah. Half a day, Chairman Son Agustin, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to sit before you and present the Guam Department of Education's fiscal year 2024 budget request and to provide testimony on behalf of the management team, division heads, administrators, teachers, staff, and most especially our students and their families. GDOE's success is largely forged in the level of support that this body provides in funding our operations so that we can be successful in providing quality education and support for our students. Before we get started in our presentations, I'd like to take note of, similar to last year, GDOE, through the leadership of the superintendent and the Guam Education Board, was deliberate in its fiscal responsibilities and took proactive measures to develop the GDOE spending priorities, which aligned to the local appropriation level provided in efforts to maximize the use of federal funds. The practice continues considering the expiration dates of the Education Stabilization Fund and the American Rescue Plan grants. The following chart shows a combination effect of reduced appropriations as well as cash shortfalls in fiscal year 2020. From FY20 through FY22, GDOE has seen a steady decline in the appropriations levels as well as cash released by the Department of Administration. From FY20 to FY22, GDOE's appropriations declined $18 million or 8%. Over the same period, the total cash shortfall amounted to $22.1 million. Although GDOE's appropriation increased from $232.6 million for FY23, a noticeable increase of $26.6 million, it fell short $35.7 million of the GEB approved budget request for that year. It's important to note the significance of not only the decline in local appropriations, but the impact of cash shortfall on GDOE's operations and its ability to pay vendors timely and address all obligations. Okay. On January 27th, 2023, after a lengthy budget process that began at our schools and concluded with several work sessions with the Guam Education Board, the Guam Education Board approved the FY24 budget request of $287,361,715. Subsequently, GDOE submitted an updated budget request in the amount of $294 million for increased funding in response to the adjusted 22% to the general pay plan. GDOE, along with the support of the Guam Education Board, has developed the FY24 budget, which represents a baseline funding level to adequately fund staffing and critical contracts to keep our schools operational. The largest cost category in our FY24 budget requested is for personnel, totaling $239.3 million. The personnel budget request includes funding for $231 million in salaries and benefits for the department's filled and vacant positions, $3.1 million for merit bonuses, $1 million for BRIP, $1 million for anticipated salary increments, $620,000 in salaries and benefits for substitute teacher positions, as well as payments for tomorrow's studies and teacher preparation. The next two slides will break down our personnel budget request between filled versus vacant positions. School-based positions make up the majority of the FY24 personnel budget request, with 2,492 positions totaling $209.7 million. The three highest staffing levels continue to be teachers, school aides, and school-based administrative staff. Currently, our teacher filled position count is 1,871, including JROTC instructors, which amounts to $168.1 million for salaries and benefits. School aid positions include 254 positions totaling $12 million, and school administrative staff positions are currently at 160, amounting to $8.3 million. The next table summarizes filled positions at GDOE's central office. The current staffing level for centrally based positions amounts to 119 professional and support staff, with a total of $8.9 million in salaries and benefits. The largest staffing levels for central office continue to be facilities and maintenance, financial affairs, human resources, and procurement. Those four offices represent 57% of the central office's personnel budget. I'll call your attention that the total cost for salaries and benefits alone amounts to the aforementioned $239 million for our current staffing levels. This already is $7 million over the total appropriation provided for FY23. Additionally, on January 30, 2023, the Director of the Department of Administration recommended that the pay structure for the Guam GPP was adjusted by 22%. To account for these pay adjustments, the Board of Education approved an amended FY24 budget request inclusive of an additional $7.2 million to reflect the 22% increase to the GPP. Included in this year's budget request are GDOE's vacant positions. We've identified 227 positions, which accounts for $14.2 million. The majority of these positions are to support our schools in staffing teachers, school aides, and assistant principals. Additionally, included in this year's request are 35 facilities and maintenance positions which have been deemed critical to support the health and safety of our schools. The table presented reflects a summary of vacant positions requested. Our operations budget request for $25.4 million and is comprised primarily of critical contractual services necessary for operations of GDOE schools and central headquarters. The request consists of funding necessary for facilities and maintenance contracts, which include solid waste collection, custodial services, generator maintenance, air conditioning maintenance, grounds maintenance, cafeteria equipment maintenance, fire alarm systems maintenance, and heavy equipment and vehicle fleet maintenance. Other items in our operations request are the Child Nutrition Program local subsidy, funding for external audit fees, the third-party fiduciary agent contract, technology contracts for internet services, printer and copy machine services, the annual contract fees for GDOE's Munis system, funding for library books and supplies, interscholastic sports, and hygiene products for students. Lastly, GDOE's FY24 operations budget includes $500,000 allocation to the University of Guam Press in lieu of $1.5 million textbook fund appropriation. The following is a summary of the FY22 operational budget request. The budget request for utilities is $22.5 million, which assumes full utilization of our school facilities. Power consumption is the largest component of the utilities request at $16.3 million. Water consumption is expected to cost $5.7 million, and telephone services an estimated $488,000. For the last 2 fiscal years, GDOE has been able to leverage federal funding to cover power and water expenses utilizing the ARP grant. To date, a total of $38.3 million federal dollars has been expended to cover utility costs for GDOE, which is aligned with the grant activities that promote the safe return to in-person instruction. Since GDOE has reprogrammed a majority of the remaining ARP funds to capital improvement projects, and the grant expires September of 2024, the cost of utilities are included in our local budget request. Finally, the Guam Education Board submitted a capital budget request of $588,144, which is comprised of the funding for the limited gaming fund and required funding to support a level of effort to special education buses. GDOE continues to prioritize federal funding, specifically the ARP, to address capital improvements needs at our public schools. The previous acting superintendent of education was successful in reprogramming approximately $110 million for large-scale CIP projects, which includes canopies, roof work, electrical, and plumbing. Although not a part of the budget request, GDOE would like to provide the grant status report for ESF and ARP grants. As you are aware, the ESF 1 grant expired on September 30th, 2022. GDOE successfully obligated all funds available in the grant, which total $41.5 million. Currently, the ESF 2 grant has a remaining balance of $30.3 million and is set to expire on September 30th, 2023. GDOE was approved for a late liquidation of this grant extending 180 days. The grant award for ARP totaled $287 million to address many of the impacts of COVID-19 on students. The GDOE schools are allocated $293 million. Private nonprofit schools were allocated $39 million, and $8.6 million was allocated for the state administrative expenses. For the GOD's schools allocation, $2.7 million is encumbered, $101.3 million are requisitioned, and $65.4 million have been expended. The remaining available funds for GDOE schools total $70 million. In closing, GDOE is held by the Guam statute to adhere to the 14-point mandate. On your screen, you will see the listing of the 14 points and the breakdown of the FY24 budget request, which is categorized according to the $287 million in our current request. As you are aware, GDOE is currently facing many challenges. This year, we have experienced changes in leadership. Our schools are currently failing mandated health inspections, which stems from a lack of preventive maintenance to keep aging school facilities healthful, safe, and sanitary. GDOE, together with the Guam Education Board, has developed the FY24 budget, which represents the baseline funding level to adequately fund staffing and critical contracts to keep our schools operational. We ask for your full support in adequately funding education and appreciate the ongoing support by your committee. Thank you again for the opportunity to come before you today to present the FY24 budget. We welcome your partnership and your support as always. My team is available to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Swanson. I'd like to also recognize Senator Duenas that have joined us this morning. I got simple questions for you. I consider them simple because they're numbers. If you look at the spreadsheet you have in front of you, please look at it so we can go through this. Josie's there and Frank's there. They're the numbers people. So when we look at FY23, which is on column B, 232 is what you got this year, correct? Frank, you can answer that.
So 232 was what is appropriated. I do want to call to your attention that the 232 in the appropriation level includes the 12.5 for the school lunch child nutrition meals. That's actually not a cash appropriation. So we get it in the Budget Act. We identify it as 12.5, but there's never an actionable item from BBMR to allocate or DOA to release cash from that. But you're correct, Senator. It's
Okay.
232.6 on the books.
Okay. You don't need to, I know where you come from, Frank, but when we look at the 232, how much money did you guys get from federal funds for this year? 41 million?
So collectively,
Let's go down the line. You got, out of your consolidated grants, you got 41 million, correct?
excuse
Well,
me.
how much? How much you get? Just give me the numbers.
I can give you the whole inventory of GDOE grants because there's ESF and then there's ARP. But if you're talking in totality to include all our many other grants, which is USDA, SPED, our Head Start program, right now we're upwards of about $600 million in federal support. But that's to fund all of the other grant activities to include our ESF, ARP, 1, 2, and total of ARP, which is about 287.
ARP was how much? 200 and what? I'm trying to do the math.
286.9.
If you do the 232 and then you add your 280 what?
286.9.
Okay, and if you add that together, you're up to 600 million, pretty much, right? Okay. And then your other grants that you have, how much? What's your budget?
I mean, right now, if you're going to look at total,
Just give me the numbers.
I'll give you an
Frank.
estimate. So we're upwards of 700 million in total.
Okay.
Local
thank you.
local plus federal.
Okay, 700 million. And in the past, Frank, and I don't know if you were there, there was an Army Corps of Engineers evaluation of the schools. And they said it's going to cost $100 million, right? Deferred fixing, right?
For maintenance.
You got 200 million. How much was spent for those deferred fixing? Give me a number. Anything? 10 million? 20 million? Zero.
No. So
None.
let's.
Outstanding.
Now, give me a second. So the ARP, as in the testimony that our superintendent just read into the record, how much is spent from the ARP for deferred maintenance? Let me just pull those figures, but I can tell you what has been reserved and what's going through the pipeline. And right now, as Dr. Judy Wampat reprogrammed a lot of the funding in the ARP to CIP, we're looking at upwards of $110 million. $110 million specific for CIP, but then in addition to that, we use a lot of that funds directly from ESF as well to support facilities and maintenance. So let me pull the expenditures for that. I know that right now, those are funding the ACs, those are funding GW, those are funding FB, those are funding the custodial contracts. And if you give me a second, I'll just pull that figure for you and get you an estimation. But yes, there's a mix of funding that we have provided. There's a mix of funding that we do have. And right now, in terms of large-scale CIP projects, we're looking at the $110 million directly from ARP. The rest are coming from several other grants to include ESF.
Okay. Now, I spoke to you earlier during the previous acting superintendent, not the current superintendent. I asked about Title I to take care of your solar, your utilities. Has that moved anywhere? Has any of the federal folks gone after that Title I to get that grant so that you can maybe offset that $16.3 million in power by having a bunch of solar panels all over and working that with GPA and so forth? Has it moved anywhere? Or is it even in your thoughts? I'm not throwing it at you, Dr. Swan. You just walked in. You're on a hot seat, but you're good. You just have fun. You'll be okay. But I'm just curious about that, Frank. And only because I brought this up with the acting superintendent. I just want to know if it moved anywhere.
So as far as I recall, the acting superintendent and myself and key players in the management team did have a meeting to examine just that. I know that was assigned to our then and now facilities manager to take a look into chasing after that grant funding. So I know it's been reviewed. In terms of status of where we're at and going after it, I'm not sure we're quite that far along right now.
Okay. I'm just calling out the numbers. Number one, the Army Corps of Engineers said $100 million to fix schools. And you don't need to comment on that one. It's a moving target, Frank.
Yes.
And unfortunately, 3 of you have gone through 2 different superintendents. Now you got the second one right now. And I'm just referring to the Army Corps of Engineers said $100 million. ARP dropped on the lap. I'm going to just say this point blank. I may be wrong. Nothing moved to fix any of the $100 million deferred. And that could have fixed quite a few schools, where even when the typhoon came and there was any damage, FEMA would have reimbursed you 100%. Because why? Federal money was fixing it. Local money was mixing it. FEMA would come and says, you know what? We need to harden your infrastructure. It would have been an easy motion, okay? With that, and then the same thing with what's going on with Simon Sanchez. I visited FB Leonguero with the vice chair, and there's equipment sitting outside, and I'm like, what does it take? I'm just very concerned, Frank, because as we're talking about the budget, as everybody's reaching out for money, it's hard for me to swallow to say, I support DOE. There's no doubt about that. I'm a former chairman of the board, 100% for DOE. But I'm just not going to say, let's just give you money, and then nothing happens. If you can't spend federal money, why give you local money that's going to sit? That's what worries me. And then how many vacancies do you have today? Because the school year ended. We're already in June or July. We're going to start a new school year. How many vacancies do you have, and how much does that equate to in money? Because remember, you got the 2023 funding. And if you didn't spend it and you didn't hire people, then that's money sitting. And as other agencies are struggling and hoping to get funding from this body, we're going to say, let's give you $14.2 million. I think that's what you guys identified, the vacancies. To do what? Let it sit longer? I mean, I can understand you need psychology. There's certain things you're going to need. I'm not going to debate that. But there's certain things that bothers me, that we need teachers, but we're not hiring teachers, we're hiring substitute. We need, you need a bunch of stuff, but there's no movement. There's all the reasons why it's not happening. And that's the only thing that bothers me. And every time Senator Burnett has these town hall meeting or oversight hearing, I'm like, I just sit back and watch it on YouTube because it's exciting. I'm like, wow. There's got to be motion. And Dr. Swan's, like I said, welcome to DOE. And we'll be reaching out to you to ask you, where are you at? You know, I always ask everybody, where are you at? Where you want to go and how can I help you? But if you don't know where you're at, and I know where you're at, how the funding is set up, I know where you need to go, and you're not telling me how we can help you, my colleagues here are going to just have fun just asking the questions. Why haven't we moved on this? And that's what throws me off. Sure, the acting superintendent, reprogram everything. You can reprogram anything you want. I really don't care. But if it don't move, it doesn't mean anything. I reprogrammed to here, but it didn't happen. You got the facilities people. When I was on the board, we set it up to be regionalized, and it was working, and then it disappeared, and then it's centralized, and they're all getting beaten up. And they're being blamed for something they had no control of. And that should never happen. The city's people are doing the best they can. And with that note, I have other questions, but I'll allow first Senator Burnett to have fun and...
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for that open. Good morning, Guam Department of Education. Viva Lunes. Thank you for taking your time. I know that everyone in the department's working so hard to get the schools open, so definitely appreciate you coming down here to the People's House. But I just kind of wanted to start, if I could, with recent reports that were in the media relative to the limited term one-to-one aides. If you could just, because I was, the memo came out kind of randomly, and there were a couple media stories about it, then I had been asked about it, but I haven't really heard much about it since then. So if you could maybe just from the genesis to the, is there a resolution in place, please? Thank you.
I'll take that one. The memo that was out was not officially released. I was in the process, and have been in the process of doing just exactly what Senator San Agustin would like us to do, and that's reprogram funding. So in the meetings that I had with the administrative staff that's responsible for that, I said, hold, we're going to look for extra dollars in another category because this is an impact on a number of our employees, whether they can afford to work for us or not. We have been able to successfully fund that for at least another year by reprogramming funds we have. So that document that you saw was not released over my signature. It was, for lack of a better term, leaked. For whatever purpose, I don't know, but it served no good at all in the community.
Thank you for that, Mr. Superintendent. So just officially on the record, we're holding these positions at full-time, is that what you're saying, at least for the next year?
That's our intent at this point, yes. You know, the next year is the next year, but these are positions, because they are one-to-one aides. If you don't have the child with the needs, you don't have the position. That's why they're renewed annually. And to our knowledge, we still have those students, so we're keeping those individuals. And then it's an accounting issue with what part of their salary is charged against the special education program, what part is our general program, because it's about the time on task. And that's an internal bookkeeping matter, but we do, it was about 20% of the cost of the personnel that we had to find a source for, and that's in our general fund allocations.
Thank you for that. And I don't want to turn this into an oversight hearing, but if you could vet the process that these correspondences are leaked or whatever it was, because I did notice that the memo that was, and I hesitate to use the word leak because I had received it from one-to-one aides who obviously were very alarmed, concerned, frustrated, anxious about that. So, and just do a better job of, you know.
Let me put it this way. We're endeavoring to teach everyone in the organization appropriate protocol for conducting business. I look at it this way. We're all one crew. There are no passengers. And I have some folks have to learn how to do business a little bit differently than they have in the past. The memo never should have gone out to the to the employees, period.
Thank you, sir. I did want to ask about the 7 program coordinator vacancies. Can you give us a little more information on those?
So the 7 program coordinator vacancies that are currently listed in this budget request, those are positions that are funded in our CIP. So we've had difficulties recruiting from standpoint of cost and getting people interested in the engineering positions. One of the advantages of a PC position is it's a little bit more competitive in terms of wages. So right now we did just recently pick up a new CIP administrator. He actually holds the official government title of a PC. He's a PC4. And then Senator Joe, if I can, on the vacancies that you requested, we did request in our FY27 budget 227. Again, it's always a moving target for us as we have people in and out of our department. You can imagine with a department that is over 3,500 employees that there's going to be some high turnover. Just the nature of some of our employments that lapse and end when we work on a school year basis. So at least to date from the 227 and what we've been tracking is how frequently we can pick up some of these key positions. So over the last year, we were able to pick up 81 positions. A lot of those were in the teach and the school aid positions. And then going back to your previous, as we left the discussion, sorry, Senator Barnett, but just to touch base on the ARP, I know that we're saying that there hasn't been a push and an effort, and I have to say that there has been in terms of spending that money down straight for CIP projects, which is, again, is in the summary table presented in today's budget. GDOE, the large part of the requisitions and workflow is for its CIP projects. What we understood in this process was this process took us, it's a very lengthy process, from assessment to procurement to award to contracting. So right now is we're in the back end of getting these requisitions converted, reviewed, and trying to get into contract. But at least for the most part, there has been a concerted effort to put our best foot forward in getting our contractual support for major CIP projects. And that's evidenced by the requisitions and workflow over $105 million. And then again, to the support of the F&M side, the F&M side right now from the federal grants is being leveraged primarily for a lot of the supplies and materials that they're receiving. And then the critical contracts at the schools, the air conditioning, the grass cutting, the custodial services, and then right now, more recently, some of the supplies to get the school ready for opening. And then we do have additional support that we're providing from, again, various layers of grants throughout the year. So there's a combination of not only the federal, but we do have some local when we're pushing these things in. And we're doing our best job. I understand the frustration when we get into the media and we're failing on our school inspections and we're going through these processes in our facilities. I'm not going to make any excuses, have to be up to par. We have to get those passed. But again, it's not from a lack of effort. We are doing our best with the funds provided. We're moving these things through the process. Again, and it's positive to see that we're having this available funding provided by the federal leverage to get these big actions kind of in place. Sorry, Senator.
No, thank you, Frank. Could you, the facilities and maintenance positions, what was the status of the job fair that you guys had relative to, I know that you were trying to fill some of these positions?
So those are always challenging positions to fill. I don't want to go on the record saying the specific numbers that we were able.
Was it one person who applied?
No, I think there's higher than that.
Okay.
I think there was more than one that applied. I don't know.
Thank God.
Yeah.
'Cause that's what I had heard.
Yeah.
Was it less than 10?
Possibly. And again, it goes into what we're recruiting and what the market conditions are for those positions when they become of a certain skill set. What we're finding is generally there's journeymen, there's trades helpers, there's these beginning carpenter ones, welder ones, electricians, and as we get them in, they go through the process. Once they get the certain skill set of a senior person who has the capacity, you're going to see that can be gainfully employed outside of government services for a higher rate. And there's a high demand for that work anyways. So we're competing amongst many other employers for those positions.
May I ask though, when these, and if you're able to fill these positions, are you looking at these positions being filled long-term to maybe stem off and avoid the current situation that we're in?
Correct. So there was two things. One is there's immediate need to staff our facilities maintenance. Right now, we have more schools than we have workers in our divisions. If you were to assign one, we'll still be short. The previous acting superintendent, and I sat before this legislature with her action to take it in two measures, right, is to staff up the facility maintenance, have those guys on our workforce, have them do rapid response, but then longer-term planning, establish that private-public partnership where we do contract out a consultant or hire services who oversees not only their workforce but our workforce to make sure that we have not only the adequate staffing levels but the expertise, and we have them available to us to make sure that the schools are supported.
I know the former acting superintendent, Wampat, just to
Yes.
differentiate between, she had talked about talking with retirees, former facilities and maintenance employees. I know that was something that she has suggested we help with legislatively, but was there any traction with that? Was there an interest? Is that something that we should look at more? Yeah, I know. Yeah. We do have a bill.
Yeah, the bill's
just
coming
following
up.
up. Yeah.
Yeah, so the bill's coming up. I mean, I think we are all in favor of that and support those efforts. What it yields in terms of people coming out of the workforce into the department, understanding the heavy workload and stresses remains to be seen. So we'll just take it as we go.
Thank you, Frank. And I do have more questions, but I do want to defer to my colleagues. But before I do, the status of the $20 million that we had appropriated, can you give us a report on that?
So that was one of the hugest things that, again, and as we came down here, there was challenges with how we were trying to expedite, get these services and these long-term arrangements. One of the things that we were looking forward to was having that base and any additional base that we can have specifically for, as Senator San Agustin mentioned, deferred maintenance. Any solution that we have, the department, it's really necessary, critical at this juncture. And if you look at the current standing, when the legislature passed that bill and gave us the $20 million, that was going to provide a lot of these immediate solutions, a lot of these gaps to get us into better service contracts, better support for our facilities maintenance. One of the things that recently happened is upon the emergency of the typhoon, those funds were recalled to make sure that there was seed money for the governor in terms of acting and having an emergency response for the government as a whole. So we learned as we try to get using some of that money for some of the immediate responses to address some of the concerns from the typhoon, such as mold remediation, down fencing, some water damage at our schools, that those fundings were not made available at this point in time. So we are in contact with the governor's office and BBMR, and we're trying to work a coordination with the team to go through the DLAN and the Homeland Security for the procurement and for those services and support.
Have you received any of the $20 million? Because I know that we had gone
No.
into committee of the whole back in, I want to say May, and I'd asked the administration director, and he had said something like, oh, the next day we're going to give him some money.
Not at all, and we tried and we did a writing to the DOE administrator to try to have access to those funds. Again, the $10 million was reserved in our mindset and management for the public-private partnership, and the additional $10 million was for the facilities and maintenance and CIP support. So to date, no, we haven't drawn any of the $20 million.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Burnett. I'd like to also recognize two other colleagues that have joined us, Senator Tello Taitigui and Senator Joanne Brown. Senator and Senator Frank Blas. Senator Chris, do you have any questions or comments for the panel?
Sidus Mazdi, Mr. Chairman, and I had a line of questioning, but I want to start with this $20 million because that, to the new superintendent, welcome aboard, sir. I think that's completely unacceptable. The law that was passed by this legislature recently and the $50 million that was allowed for the governor to use should not in any way have adjusted any appropriations that this legislature has passed for Department of Education. So I'm going to encourage you at this point to work with Mr. Cooper Nurse to write a letter to Department of Administration and to comply with the law that is going to require them to continue to give you the allotment of that $20 million. In fact, I'm really rather upset about that at this moment. Because if you really think about it, the authorization that this legislature gave to the executive branch to authorize the use of up to 50 million was for response to the typhoon. And we're now hearing from the chief fiscal officer that that's exactly what you're wanting to use the funds for. We're grappling over this issue to prepare schools, not just for the inspections and what was required in terms of the public health inspection requirement, but now with the typhoon, I cannot imagine that in any way is going to be helpful to withhold those funds with the requirements that you have. So I really would appreciate it, sir, and with the team and even the Board of Education to indicate to the governor that this is completely unacceptable. That 20 million was appropriated from this legislature, and it was after the former acting superintendent had come before us as well, saying that that was much needed funding, particularly for the capital improvement projects, because as in your presentation, sir, and it was very well done. In your presentation, you showed how the former superintendent stuck to her word, which was it was only 70 million of the ARP that could be reprogrammed for the purposes of the readiness of the schools. That is the reason why this legislature actually originally had it at 30 million to accomplish the 100 million of deferred maintenance that was not done for the schools. But we made the adjustment to be able to handle other commitments that were made, such as the 22%, and so the rest is history. But I'm going to make that personal appeal to the entire, starting from the superintendent to all the way down, to indicate to the governor that that is unacceptable and those allotments should be released post haste, in my humble opinion. So, Frank, going back to, because I'm sure you've done your homework, sir, and I think this is where I can see how we arrive now, and I want to reiterate this and make sure it's on the record, Frank, that in the request on the former budgets, there was a utilities, there was an amount of money that was used under ARP for utilities, which basically allowed for your request to be less than what is currently requested. Did that happen? And the former superintendent made it clear in hearings that we had that that would be discontinued. This fiscal year, the utilities would return to the general fund in terms of the requirement for utilities. Can you bring us up to date on that, Frank?
Correct. So in the past, as we go through the budget process, and as the superintendent alluded to in the testimony, it starts with the school's ask, but it also goes through the review of the board. Even past that, when the appropriation levels come in from the legislature, that appropriation that gets reviewed by our board, and we have to set what's called the spend plan and spend priority so that we're aligned with the appropriation levels. So in years past, as we recognize the ask, and in the presentation you saw the GEB ask versus the appropriation level, once we get the appropriations, the department takes deliberate actions to make sure we stay within those appropriation levels. So in years past, as we fell short, it was the federal leverage that came in to cover. So I can tell you right now, for FY22 and 23, we covered the power and water. FY22 alone, power was 15.5 million, water was over 5.7. In FY23, it was over 13 million and 3.9 respectively. We also used that in the years past, as I mentioned, for custodial, grounds maintenance, and we carried those for the last fiscal year. So in moving forward, we've included it back into the budget, understanding that there's going to be a need for support and understanding that that grant is going to expire next year. And then again, what we wanted to do, and the former acting superintendent, was to protect the ARP from going back into using it for power and water, pushed it into CIP.
So Frank, if we move,
In the mindset that we had the $20 million to get the seed money to go through. One thing that I do want to also note on the 20 million, and I'm glad that I'm hearing the support, is because right now with the typhoon, we didn't anticipate getting devastated by a typhoon. One of the key things in getting FEMA reimbursements is having, I hate to say, seed money to get things through the process for reimbursement. How do we have seed money with local appropriations that are already, it's already set? We're set in a set structure. So one of the challenges that we're having is that 20 million would have been one of the key things for us to be very efficient in going after providing these funds, get it through the procurement, and then working straight with FEMA. I don't want to say that those funds are not available, because the governor's office and even BBMAR themselves reached out and said, work with their process to go through Homeland to get those things covered. But today we haven't got any of those services or those amounts. I'm sorry, go ahead.
My concern, Frank, going back to that, and I'm sure hopefully the new superintendent will appreciate this, is that you have basically less now than 1 quarter to be able to, and as far as I'm concerned, I'm going to work with my colleagues. If we get to the end of the fiscal year, while we're debating the fiscal year budget, if that has not been expended, I will make a motion on the floor for a carryover appropriation, because those funds should be locked. If you have been unable to use them because they have not been made available. And that was not the bargain when we passed the law. When we passed the law, we recognized that there was significant amount of requirements for the Department of Education to meet this very arduous ask that the legislature put forward in order to be able to prepare your schools. You cannot do that without funding. And it was also made very clear that cash on hand from local appropriations was going to be king in terms of meeting the sanitary requirements and all the smaller projects, as the ARP was anticipated for major structural repairs, other things that were in the B, C, and D category of what was going on. So really, I can't overstress how important that is, because that local appropriation should be able to have cash on hand to be able to handle those smaller projects and those things that actually are vital to ensuring that the schools can be prepared. So Frank, you have a commitment, at least from myself, and hopefully the rest of our colleagues, to carry over that appropriation, particularly as it shows right now. You haven't been able to use not even 1 penny of it. So moving from utilities forward, Frank, so let's go now into what is the actual that you've been able to, now that you've had the 22% in play, what is the actual annualized cost of that?
So at least for, again, in the presentation, as we projected, to take us to year end, it was a little bit over $3 million. To fund the entire year for next year in this budget, it's going to be upwards of $7 million.
So now if we go from utilities that were under ARP before, now we've got the 22%, which was included in the budget request. I think we're getting a little closer to why you're requesting this amount. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So I think that it's becoming clear that really, I think, even on your, because the variance is close to $50 million. Let's just put it on the table in terms of what the governor's request is and in terms of what your request is. Frank, I think it's important for you to put it on the record, because we got to be very clear here. Just the personnel cost, utilities, and otherwise, give us that bottom line figure. Personnel and operations outside of what other your requests that you've had, because we're going to have to, in regard to what the other departments, agencies, autonomous and otherwise, have come before us, we have variances of anywhere between 50 to 100 to 400% differences in terms of budget requests. So sure. I'm going to need to know that personnel operations number, just a flat line number on that.
Okay, so if I can, on the personnel side, what's transmitted to this body for approval is a personnel cost of $239.3 million. I want to note and emphasize that already about 210 is what we're carrying in our books as filled positions. I don't get to change that expense next year. I mean, if the appropriation level comes in shorter, I still have 210. Additionally, from that, the $14 million represents the key positions that we're trying to fill in terms of vacancies. So these are teachers, these are school aides, these are facilities and maintenance. These are the ones that we sat down as a team, discussed, and said these are critical in nature of supporting operations. Additionally, as you asked, Senator, that's personnel cost alone, 239. If you want to take out the vacancies, you're going to less 14, but you less the 14 and add in the 7 mil. So you're going to be upwards of about, let's just see, Yeah, you're going to be like at 216, 217 in total Lombardi costs with the GPP. If you give us the money for the vacancies to fill the one-to-ones, the teachers, the substitutes, that's going to run another 14 million. In terms of utilities, that's straightforward. That's power and water. That's to keep our lights on and our water running. That's estimated at 22.5, and we're actually using last year's cost with a small escalation scale. And then operations, we slimmed it down. And you look at the capital budget, there's next to nothing in there except for the support for local buzzing and the sports facilities funds. But on the operational side, those are just baseline contracts. These are contracts we have to get paid. These are the grounds maintenance. These are we're having it funded, but we need these baseline support in our operations as well. So the budget to your point, Senator, we've got 230 last year. We're asking for 294 this year. It's critical to note that 85% of that will be personnel. And right now, I'm carrying 210 into the year, absent the 22%. So give me about 217, and I can pay my people. Give me anything more, add 22.5, and we can keep the power and the water running for the schools. That's, again, considering that we have some federal leverage to support the contractuals for this year, and then we'll get the CIP moving with the ARP.
On your contractual, Frank, I'm looking at the requirements for JFK and other schools. Is this because of the fact that this fiscal year there is no anticipation of getting, was this your entry or the governor's entry in terms of not getting the funding under the Compact Impact in order to support those contracts, or those contracts that are already in place because of the commitments from Department of Education out of their annual budget request?
I'm sorry, Senator, can you point me directly to which one you're referring to?
So if we go back in the presentation, we got on your contractual, I believe.
Oh, okay. For the
facilities and maintenance, you got
facilities.
JFK in there. You've got Ukudu. Are those annualized contracts that are not part of? I just want to make sure that we're.
So generally what happens is we do carry on our books the kind of the debt service, right, and the lease agreement costs. So these are included in these facilities and maintenance supports, as well as some of the nominal amounts that we provide to our staff as well.
So these are generally an annualized request.
Yes.
For this, it's not due to the fact that we're anticipating not receiving Compact
No,
Impact. Okay.
this is generally an annualized request.
So Frank, I mean, to me, first of all, I want to once again commend everyone in the Department of Education who's diligently out there working today and every day to get the schools ready and to follow through on what is obviously a Herculean task. So I don't want to get into your operations. I trust that the day-to-day operations of the Department of Education are being handled properly. But I want to close with this, Frank. Well, two things, really. I got a note from a good friend of mine, Senator Sam Bibini, and there's been a connect over the years between Department of Labor and Trades Academy in particular in terms of the opportunities for training opportunities and employment opportunities for you to maybe be able to fast track some of your maintenance folks. Is there an agreement currently in place with Trades Academy as being kind of your how would I say this, basically your through point for those individuals so that you can probably bring them on faster and maybe even have some grant capability or use some of the DOE manpower development funds to go over to Trades Academy so that we can fast track getting these folks on board. Because as you've mentioned before, Frank, many times, there's really a lot of the employment pool that you have out there to fast track getting your maintenance up to par is because you have issues with individuals who are, trained or not trained, and they won't meet the requirements to come in on maintenance. And so I would like to see that there's a link here between that, because that's the whole purpose of that fund. So do you have any correspondence or connection with Trades Academy and Department of Labor to fast track to meet your needs for maintenance staff, because you've got it in your budget? Do you have that dialogue going on now?
So I know there's been discussions. I know our previous superintendent has also personally reached out to Trades Academy. Do we have a signed agreement? No. What we're trying to do is establish such an apprenticeship program where we can use some of this. And again, from GDOE standpoint, there hasn't been a shortage of people willing to step up and help. It's a matter of us making sure that we have the right mechanisms to establish this program and leverage the staff. And I'm sitting next to Dr. Okada, who also has GCC folks that can come aboard and help us as well. And I know in years past, and I think they're actually supporting one school right now, which is GW. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I'm fully aware as well, and I just think many of us senators have taken tours of Trades Academy. It's a wonderful facility, and the reason why I bring this up is because of the fact that, you know, you're one of the things that you've made known, and which is very understandable. If you're trying to get a 5-year, 7-year trained, you know, carpenter on board, or a plumber or an electrician, obviously you're going to have a hard time recruiting, because these individuals have the skills that are marketable to every other operation on Guam that needs electricians, plumbers, individuals, carpenters to do the work. Whereas, you know, you get these entry-level folks who are signed off as having finished the courses and the like through Trades Academy, which is a very fast process, as we've seen since we've been up there, is you're getting them at entry level. So it really works with your budget a little better too, and you know, they become familiar with your system, with the Department of Education, and hopefully they grow as they're there, and you hold on to them, and they can continue to improve the maintenance capabilities. But I'm encouraging it because of the fact that, first of all, it can be fully paid for under the Manpower Development Fund and Department of Labor. It's not a cost to you, and you're getting, you know, the pickings when the folks are trained up and ready to come on board and hopefully, you know, enhance your immediate needs. I just throw that out there for your consideration in terms of correspondence with other government entities that can help. So in closing, I just really don't see, and I just wanted to make sure it's on the record, Frank, I just don't really see much variance capability here, and maybe somewhere around 5%. I mean, it really looks like you can't budge much off of about $10 million in terms of what your request is in terms of your hard numbers. I just want to make sure that that's on the record.
I can't stress that enough. When we came down and we took this approach in the budget, you're looking at our personnel costs, you're looking straight at our power and water, and these are critical contracts. There's not a lot in there for enhanced building, and, you know, all of these additional stuff that's others, you know, there's nothing that's in there that isn't critical to operations that we're asking. We're asking for personnel, we're asking for power, water. There's $500,000 set aside for capital improvement, and then the other start is the maintenance contracts that we need to make sure that our schools are operational. So yeah, in terms of variance, that's the reason this budget's presented this way. We're trying to do our best to put our best foot forward, to take anything out that, and in years past, and I'm sitting with Dr. Carter, in years past we've come in with over $300 million in requests, only to come back with 220, 230. So this one right now is really factoring. We've done our due diligence to cut where we could cut, but it's critical right now with the funding levels where it's at, that this level of support comes in. And again, there's going to be, in addition to this, that need for the $20 million, the need for funding for deferred maintenance, the need for additional support, that will come into play. That will come into play very shortly here for us.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, once again, for the benefit of the incoming superintendent, yeah, in the past when they've done a complete budget based on all 14 points, there have been upwards of requests of $380 to $390 million of this body. I'm pointing that out because the request here, as you've put in your testimony, as you read it, is usually what ends up as a breakdown request from not being able to realistically meet every single line of the requirements, as has been, like I said, put before this body before, upwards of $300, $380, $390 million. And, you know, obviously, I want to say I appreciate the fact that this has come in with, and we have to understand that at least at this basic request, there's really not very much room, because you didn't do that this year. You didn't come before us and say, if we turned every screw, painted every door, you know, made sure there was no chip on every desk in the classroom, you know, it's going to be $390 million. But you've come in, as I see it, and said this is what we need to be able to open the schools on a daily basis and take care of our children. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Reyes. Senator Tyree.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Afternoon or good morning to my colleagues and to those who are here. And Mr. Superintendent, very nice to see you now in front and center as you take our questions and I'm sure comments and concerns. You know, I hope you don't take them lightly because DOE is one of the most important agencies on this island, and we're looking forward to assisting you when we can. You know, my door is always open. As Mr. Cooper Nurse, Joe, they always know, they can always call on me, and I appreciate that in return, because if I have questions, I hope that we can get an answer. So I'll be asking for your cell phone number later on, okay? And you will regret that, but no, anyways.
I
I'm
have to
just
trust
kidding.
my team.
Okay. Okay, so first question I have is, maybe Frank, you might be able to answer, or Mr. Superintendent, what is the population of the students for FY 21-22, and then the population for the students at DOE for FY 22-23?
Can you ask those school years again? Which?
Well, this school year versus last school year.
So I think we're hovering a little bit over 25,000 students.
Okay, so it was 25,000, I'm sorry.
It's a little bit over 25,000, and I think the number is decreasing. So right now it's rough. It's easy to, I mean, it's safe to say that we're in the neighborhood of about 25,000 students.
Okay, and that was this school year, and then last school year, I'm sorry.
I believe the number was slightly higher last school year.
Okay,
I'll
so
have to go back.
there has been a significant drop.
Yeah, so it was like 26,000, Senator.
I'm sorry?
I believe it was about 26,000 the previous year.
Oh, I thought it was, okay, I thought it was 32, and then
32 would be further.
further back,
Yes.
right? And then everything happened, and now we're at 25. So in the last maybe 4 years, we've gone from 32,000 students down to 25 now, and yet the budget keeps going on, and I mean going higher and higher, and I mean we know a lot of it has to do with the cost
Correct.
of living. Inflation has grown it quite a bit, but I just wanted to. Okay, so we have 25,000, 26 last year. Does it cost DOE more money to have classes online than it does in person? Or vice versa?
You know, from a costing standpoint, and I can only speak from my experience from when I was sitting in the DFAS seat, which came in the tail end of COVID as well. So does it cost more money? This budget is presented to this body with the anticipation that we are fully operational face-to-face. In years past, in COVID, we saw some, I don't want to say a lot, but we did see some operational savings in terms of power and utilities.
Savings, right? So there is some savings there.
There was a
Okay.
small amount of cost savings
Right.
when we were non-operational and we were forced to shut down.
And that brings me to your amount for power that you are requesting, or that's here, that I'm seeing on the sheet, about 16 million. Now, last year, there was 17 million given to you in power, water, and sewer combined, but then you augment that with ARP money, right?
Correct.
How much of the ARP money did you use to cover those, for FY23, are you using to cover power and water? Because the reason why I'm bringing this up is, you know, if you're looking at that amount and your increase,
Sure.
yeah, let me just get that
Let me give you the amount.
estimated
So ARP leverage for power, and I'll give it to you in FY22 and 23. So ARP leverage for power in 22 was 15.5 billion. For water, it was 5.7. In FY23, it's 13 million and 3.9 to date.
So on top of the 17 million that the legislature gave you?
So what happens is, again, in the appropriation, yes, that's on top in terms of the costing, correct?
Okay. So 17 million plus, I'm sorry, can you give me those numbers again? It was 13 million?
13 and 3.9.
Okay, and then the other one? You had two numbers. You had water.
In FY22?
Yeah.
In FY22, it was 15.5 and 5.7.
Okay. So now we're looking at about $30 million in utilities. right? But yet you're asking only 22,538,000 unless you plan on using ARP funding for the next FY24. Are you planning on using any ARP funding to cover any utilities?
No, that's not,
Okay.
that's not the plan.
So this number of 22 million, and we just spent last year 30, or we have 30 million, and we know that the price of everything is going up, these numbers don't, this is lower than what is the reality of the price it's going to be for next year. So that's something that you really need to keep an eye on. I think you underestimated the amount. Go ahead, Mary.
So even though the department last fiscal year requested for the appropriation, when the final budget numbers came out, the superintendent had to prioritize based on the amount that was appropriated. So last year, for fiscal year 22, I know that Superintendent Fernandez at the time, early on, used about 45 million of ARP to balance what was needed for the department versus the appropriation. And in the current fiscal year, we had to do the same thing. So it's not on top of. So even if it's requested in the budget, what they had to do was take the appropriation and fill all the warm body positions first, including benefits, and then determine what the balance was, and then the remainder went back to ARP funding. So it's not on top of, it was in lieu of. So when we went to use ARP funding, it was in lieu of using local funds for the power and the water.
And what was that amount?
The amount, again, the amount for what we've used for ARP or the amount for local. So what happens is we did come down with the intention, as Dr. Okada just said, to include it in the budget. But when the Appropriation Act is passed, although the body appropriates for the expense category for utilities, when it comes in short, we didn't use it to cover utilities. We made the decision to go use the ARP to cover utilities, and then on the front end. So again, when we go back into the actual expenditure amount from last year, it was 13 million for power and FY23, 13 million for power and 3.9, and those are year-to-dates.
3.9?
Yes.
For what?
For water.
What about telephone?
I think the FY22 expenditure at that level of 15.5 and 5.7.
Okay, so you're
Is it
looking at
complete?
$27 million that was spent so far to date.
Yes.
Okay, 27 million, but yet in this appropriation for FY24, you're only asking for 22 million, and you know the rate. I don't know about you, but I got my power bill, and it is. I'm choking, you know. So I don't know how DOE is going to handle that, but that's something that you need to look into. And you may want to use ARP funding. We know you have until the end of 2024 to utilize it, so it might come in handy right now. But let us know. In the oversight chair, you know, let us know if you plan on using any ARP money for power, okay? The other one I had was, you know, I'm looking at this one because it's standing out. You know, the OFB office gives us this spreadsheet here. I probably don't know if you have the same one, but it says hygiene, the menstrual hygiene. And if I'm not mistaken, a law was passed, and this money was supposed to be, you know, funded by some kind of grant, if I'm not mistaken, and given to DOE to cover. It's $100,000. And now it's looking like you're asking for it through the general fund. Can't you go back to Jane Flores, who, you know, was pushing for this, and ask for a grant for $100,000 to cover this?
It's part of the Appropriation Act, and we'll continue the ask to support that need, to support the students at the school. I know that in years past, from the $100,000, our head nurse takes the lead in purchasing that, and she has looked for that budget as well. In going through the budget request, there was an opportunity to, again, federal leverage, and she was provided the supplies. I don't know if that's a sustainable source to continue for providing the menstrual services under that grant. That is why it's included in this budget again, to make sure that we're not short on those supplies for our students.
Can you look into that, Frank? Because,
will,
you know,
Senator.
there should be funding for that, you know, on the federal side.
Will do. Thank you.
Okay, the other one is, how many people do you have working currently in your technology department? Zero?
No, we have a few people. Again, there's
One?
there's 8, but we're short there. So I know that they're asking to fill some positions in there as well.
I'm sorry?
I believe the staffing level is currently at 8.
In your technology department to cover all your tech, your software, your firewall, you're covering the website, you have 8 people.
Correct.
And you have 3 more people that you're requesting for in your vacant positions.
Correct.
Okay. So I hope you really look into securing that, work with the Office of Technology. It seems that, we don't need to be doubling or tripling other agencies when you can have the assistance of OT to help you with your technology department on any kind of cybersecurity issues, hacking, now that you're getting more techie, especially if you're going to go online, you really need somebody to upgrade that. Okay.
Absolutely, and there's an opportunity for us. I ran into who's also a former GDOE employee. There's some things going on at the university that could provide some funding and support for us as well. So that's something we have to look into.
Check out what's his Tyrone Taitano over at the governor's office. They got $150 million for cybersecurity.
Oh, wow. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so look in that direction. But I recommend that you work with Office of Technology. Instead of reinventing the wheel and duplicating, we can work with them. So look at that about an MOU with them. The last question I have is your maintenance workers. You have 30 currently, okay, but you need 35 vacant. You have 35 that are vacant. Have you looked at, is it hard to find people to recruit them? I mean, I know carpenters and electricians are very high demanding right now, and they're very expensive. But if you're having a hard time filling these positions, if you are, have you looked into bringing, hiring private companies to come in and start doing these maintenance works on these buildings and the grounds of the schools? Have you looked into that, contracts?
Yes, and I think I mentioned earlier, one of the things is outsourcing is one of the ideas, but we did look to staff up what we needed for what we thought was essential to just the daily and the rapid responses of the school. But as the former superintendent, in her plan and in her direction, and what the department moved and was taking steps forward to was establishing that public-private partnership. So we had that money, again, going back to the CIP money and what that was reserved for to do and accomplish was exactly that, getting into contractual support, but leveraging both sides of that equation, leveraging the procurement of the supplies, the expertise through the private organization, but then utilizing some of the cost savings with our employees.
Okay, thank you, Frank. And Mr. Chair, I'm not going to get into the other question I had with regards to, are you guys going to be able to open up the school on time? And I think there's a round table that's coming up. So this is about budget and the funding, so I'll stick to that. And thank you so much for answering my questions. And welcome aboard, Mr. Superintendent. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Tyree. Senator Brown? You have any comments or questions for the panel? Drug test?
Maybe we should get drug tested. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Certainly welcome. I know the new superintendent was at a hearing not too long ago, but can I hear your voice? I haven't had a chance to hear your voice, and I know you're literally jumping into the fire on your very short time here, but maybe you can give me a little insight on what your plans are this year. I know we're looking at the budget, but you see some of the challenges as it is with regards to the revenue stream, and the demands of the department are quite significant. So I just want to get your thoughts on this budget.
We'll just say that it's keeping me challenged. But my team has done an awful lot of work on this, and they really do understand what's been working, what's not been working, but we're also looking at how to do our operation more effectively, more efficiently. The next few months are going to be just say enlightening for a number of folks. And we certainly need to work in partnership with you and with the rest of the community to make that work for our kids.
Well, I certainly appreciate that. You have a tremendous task ahead of you, but we certainly welcome your insight and your contributions and see what we can do to make things efficient, because I think there have been considerable challenges over the years with Department of Education. Again, the demands of and funding and the needs that are there, and you know, just by sheer magnitude, the number of children that you know, you have to educate every year, and trying to balance all that. I know some of our colleagues touched on the American Rescue Plan. How are you going to offset? Are you looking at how you're going to address offsetting those costs when that revenue, I mean, it's dwindling and it's not going to be here too much longer. And I understand in the past the need to do so because of your costs and expenditures. But as we phase that out, and I'm concerned coming into this budget because the demands of what you're looking, additional $50 million, I understand your justification for it, but I'm a little more concerned about the revenue stream to pay for that, especially substantial increases. And this is one of the largest that have come before us this fiscal year. I mean, you have the University of Guam that wants to double their budget, literally. And I don't know where those expectations are coming from, but our revenue stream is starting to decline, and I think we'll continue to. We certainly have benefited in a very sad way from the pandemic because it's a very unfortunate situation, but it flushed the government of Guam with regards to money coming in that literally has been spent on many things, but now that reality of where those funds are going is continuing to decrease, and yet we've increased. Some of us have, I can not claim ownership of that, but the majority of the legislature, at least the last 2 terms I've been in, have substantially increased the cost of government. And this is on top of that. This is on top of the 22% of $50+ million that's been added overall to the government that will continue to increase every year. So I just wanted to ask you, how do you look at offsetting? I know earlier was talked about the utility bill, but how's DOE looking at addressing that?
So Senator, one of the significant challenges that we'll be faced with is, again, being in that predicament when we come in here and we're asking for $295 million. And obviously, we'll wait for the body's decision and voting on what budget we do actually get. But how do we offset that? There's a number of ways, right? We're not revenue generating, so there's a combination of cost curtailment, what we can do in terms of cost savings. But then there's also going to have to be an avenue of what we can do. Again, I hope we don't cross that bridge and have to go back into federal leveraging in our ARP, because a lot of that right now has been reserved and is pushing through the procurement process for CIP projects. So we want to kind of keep that secured. But anytime we're faced with budget shortages, our department has taken the proactive measures to make sure there is a combination of scaling back things that, and again, we've done this in hiring freezes. As Senator Tello just said, you have a IT department that's 8 and you have 3 vacancies, and are you filling for facilities? Those will all be on pause. Those will all be on pause if there's not a sufficient funding source behind them. The other thing is it gets challenging in terms of cash management when we're not getting the cash support, and you're going to see the flip side of that, stalled payments. You're going to see AP growing. So as we get the budget, we'll manage it as much and as best we can. But again, as we put this budget together, one of the things that's hardest to do is we're going to wait for the budget authority to come in October. We've already started the school year. Yeah. These costs that we have are fixed. My cost for contractual, we started. And the good senator was saying that your student body went from 30 to 25. But my personnel costs, I just don't let people go home when we don't have that. So there's certain cross-levelings and attritions that we can take advantage of. But the reality is a shortage of budget in future time doesn't take away from current contractual costs. So I'm going to need to, again, when we see that, there's going to be a mixture of how we approach that fiscally in terms of a combination of cost curtailment and cost savings, and then looking for federal leverage. And as Senator Joe puts out, there's other bills in there that potentially can get us some more grant funding or even revenue generating ideas that will support us.
When you brought up, of course, vendor payments and stuff, I mean, last week we had the hospital before us and we found out that they were $24 million behind. in vendor payments. That's a substantial amount.
I'm
It's
happy.
a substantial amount, especially when, literally the work that they're doing is life-saving. How are you doing with DOE in terms of that? Because of course, in terms of getting supplies, resources, the things that
Yes.
you need, if we leave the vendors behind too long, then of course they might no longer want to do work with the government of Guam or with DOE, or they don't rush to supply the needs you have if they're not getting paid. Where are you
Absolutely.
guys with regards to your vendor payments?
I'm glad you asked that question, because one of the first things our new superintendent said is we have to be able to do business and establish a good reputation so people can support the department. How are we doing? We're significantly improved, and I want to thank our comptroller sitting to the right of me. In years past, and even when I started as deputy, I was sitting and looking at $18 million in payables. We're down to about $7 million. Again, and payables is cash. It's cash flow, so it's cash management, and we're working to improve that as well. There's some receivables that we're going to catch up on and address some of these larger base payables that we have.
I'm happy to hear that. I mean, normally the poor vendors, and I'm glad I'm not the one doing business with the government of Guam, but they're normally in the bottom of the list. We take care of payroll and everything else, and then maybe we get around to the vendors, and that ends up really strangling our ability to perform. We have very good businesses that will not deal with Gov Guam, unfortunately, and sometimes the costs we're getting in our bidding process is not the best.
That's
We end up having to pay even more because of how we go about our procurement. I want to ask about your procurement division. I was looking at your staffing pattern, and we all talk about how the procurement becomes a bottleneck. And is it the time issue, or is it the process issue, or the personnel issue to do the procurement, or what's the challenge? Because obviously you have a big long list. You have a long list of things you need to address at various levels, from major renovations and construction to minor repairs and things that you need to do. What is the situation with your procurement listing? I mean, I'm looking at what you have here. These are not even the highest paid people in your department when I'm actually looking at the breakdown here. What's your challenge from your perspective?
If we were to go specifically through all the various challenges in procurement, I think you will have to get other agencies in here and have a good sit-down roundtable to get to those issues. Specifically for GDOE, there's a number of things that add to the complexity. I think you touched base on one of them is staffing levels, but also the staff pay. A lot of these people that the law requires to go and get trainings, they're not compensated at the most competitive wages. I don't want to always bring it back to staffing and compensation, but another thing that adds to the complexity of procurement is the law, and the law is well designed. My background is audit, and the law is here to protect the funds. But in our process with where we're at standing in high risk, we're very different in terms of procurement processing than other agencies as it pertains to federal funds. So not only do we go through compliance to our local, we go through compliance with our federal. Not only do we go through local procurement processing, it goes through a separate review for federal review processing. So where you used to have a buyer, an end user, and someone signing off on the procurement, you now have for federal, and most of our procurement, again, mind you, is federal dollars. So when we get in front of ourselves, we have end users to different federal, and then it goes into one system for certifying, then it goes through another third party for review, then it goes through legal, then it comes back to procurement, and it goes back to legal. And one of the things that we've been doing is working with the AG. All of our contracts goes to the AG for review. So where a process was already designed to have the strong internal controls and not the most efficient, ours is taking that to probably a duplicate or triplicate layer, because we're on high risk, and a lot of the procurement levels are federally funded.
Well, I think that's where, again, that's the challenge of management. I mean, we're never ideally going to have all the resources we need to operate, and that's where the creativity and the decision-making process come into place. But definitely, I mean, your procurement has become a stranglehold for the department. And probably, I'm sure, as you look at addressing your resources, this is an area that needs to be strengthened, because as I look down the list, the personnel that you have here, and again, I mean, I'm looking at compensation levels in other divisions, and this isn't the division to be in.
And just one last thing to add to the procurement and the complexities of that is what we've learned as we've got higher dollar values. When we got the $100 million in CIP, was the level of technical work that went into that. You had to go out and get scope of services done. You had to do risk assessments. You had to get technical assessments done, and all the skill sets that go with getting those bids so that they're procurement proof, right? So it gets through cleanly through the process. we had to shore up. So there was a partnership. We did have assistance from GPA and an MOU. Engineers came in. GDOE does not have an engineer on staff for all the facilities that we maintain, and we had to leverage that. So again, part of the complexities add to the delays in procurement efficiency.
I know that Senator Tello and others have touched on the maintenance staff, and that's a challenge. I mean, I hope you're able to work on some of those partnerships. I know Senator Chris had mentioned that earlier, to be able to get the staffing resources that you need, because I think obviously you're aware it's an overriding concern of everyone.
Yes.
To wanting to see the basic maintenance occur. And again, in some cases, because they had not happened over the years, we end up with major problems. I mean, when you're having to shut down classrooms and wings of classrooms of schools, that's almost the extreme outcome of lack of maintenance over the years. And, you know, of course, we have typhoons. We've had an earthquake here or there. But, you know, when we don't address those issues at the very beginning, they multiply into bigger problems. Yes, we're dealing with older facilities. They're going to continue to get older as we are. And we will not have the revenue stream to continue to replace. I know a lot of focus has been made on Simon Sanchez, and, you know, that's become a bigger issue as a result of the typhoon. But we are not going to be able to replace JFKs and Simon Sanchez throughout our school system. We simply, as a community, the reality is, as much as we want to say we can, we're not going to be able to afford it. I mean, the debt service and just the existing cost of operating day to day, obviously is a tremendous challenge. So certainly anything we can do to help facilitate your maintenance staff in the school system, because I'm sure for those that are there, it's a tremendous burden. You probably never get to concentrate on one thing. You're having to go to another facility and take care of another critical problem. So. But I think we all recognize that's become a bigger issue of concern. I'm going to ask, as the chairman does, do you have designated positions for drug testing in the school system?
Designated positions?
Yes.
I believe there is, and there's also the ability to random. So those are, we do have a person assigned who oversees that. I can get you the specifics and the procedures for that.
And how often do you, of those, and again, I'm specifically identifying designated positions. Do you know how often, if at all, drug testing occurs?
I don't know how they schedule that. I don't off the top of my head.
It would be good to do so and get on top of that. I mean, with our growing drug problem that we're experiencing on Guam, and I ask this of every department and agency because of the realities of what's happening in our community and the adverse consequences that our residents are suffering from as a result of it.
Yes.
It's flagrant. It's almost in our face these days, and that's why I just want to make sure that all our public officials, and identify everyone that works in Gov Guam as a public official, you know, is properly serving our people and not contributing to the drug problem that we have in our community.
Correct. I know pre-employment, everyone goes through the required clearances, and then in my experience as DFAS, there has been several instances where division heads or departments saying that in good measure we want to go ahead and start sampling. So I've seen it happen. I don't know the frequency, but I can get you that information.
There's a previous executive order that does require annual drug testing of these positions. You know, this administration has not been consistent with that, but I think certainly you guys have your own leadership direction at DOE that you would do that. And I see it more as a deterrent. I don't like, oh, we caught you. I think it's more to say, hey, I value my job and my family even more, that I'm going to be responsible employee in this government, and I think that's what we need to see, because what's going on out there in the realities really is contrary to what most law-abiding citizens want to see. With regards to your buses, I know you have them for your special needs children. Who does the maintenance to maintain those buses for you? Those are the smaller little buses we always see going around.
Excuse me, Erica Cruz, Deputy Superintendent. Our Special Education Department contracts for maintenance of our school buses.
Okay, so you go ahead and directly have that taken care of by a private vendor that performs those services?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm glad to hear that, because again, maintenance of buildings, maintenance of equipment. How about your overall DOE fleet? I mean, I'm sure you do have personnel that go from school to school, that they're, you know, our official government vehicles. How are those serviced also? Are they also serviced on a maintenance contract? How are those repairs addressed?
Oh, I'm sorry. In the budget request, the maintenance of effort is the local subsidy to support the school buses. I think generally the SPED takes the lion's share of costing, and then we have 2 buses that are locally funded. That's our level of effort.
But the maintenance of, how you address the maintenance of those vehicles, are they also
I believe it's the same,
contracted out
yes.
as well to a
Correct.
private vendor for maintenance? Okay, I want to make sure of that, because otherwise we're going to be, we're going to be challenged overall with those issues. I don't have a lot of other questions. I know my colleagues have asked them. Again, I just put that word of caution, as I do to every government agency, because of the, in some cases, substantial increases. And yours is the largest, understandable, you're the largest agency in the government. But, you know, as I see the increased cost on top of what has already been authorized, and then I see the numbers coming in and I see that decrease happening, which is a reality. It was expected. I mean, unfortunately, this legislature and the last one has chosen to put long-term obligations on short-term revenue. And I think those realities are going to come home. You know, recently, and I'm sure Senator Blas will ask for it, but when we saw the memo that came out for the school aids for the special needs children, is that the beginning? Are there other positions in the government you're looking that will not be funded or decrease funding?
I'm sorry, Senator, can you repeat that question one last?
We saw the memo that came out to the staff assistants for the special needs children that came out a couple of weeks ago. Are there any other positions that you're looking at that may be impacted by decreased revenue?
That particular memo that should never have been released, the request was, the information was given to me in a staff meeting that there would possibly be the need to cut those positions to part-time, and I said, no, hold on that. We're going to investigate alternative funding so that we can fill in the difference, and we were able to do that. So that memorandum never should have been sent to employees to start with. Now, we do have to re-announce those positions annually because
Yes.
they support specific students, and once the student leaves us, then that position leaves with him. But, so that part is normal procedure. But we've been able to find additional general fund dollars to fill those positions so that we'll retain those employees in a full-time status.
So have those positions, has that memo been rescinded? Has the memo been rescinded?
Yes, yes, it's been withdrawn there, and we should be clear on that by now.
I just want to bring this up because, again, this kind of bothered me last year when we were looking before the budget and money had been taken out because we didn't authorize the pay raise last year for DOE. Let's be clear about that. We did not initially authorize the pay raise, and funds were taken out of, and I know Senator Blas can elaborate more specifically on this, out of money that had been put aside for maintenance. And what became a major issue in the last few months? Maintenance. And then again, when the issue came up with the previous acting superintendent, when we were discussing those issues, priority was placed again on the 22% of saying that they could do the budget, but they wanted to preserve the pay increase. And again, that was what we were told on the floor of the legislature. So I just want to be cautious because, you know, we do this and we say we want these things. I think we all do, but I also want to make sure we have the revenue stream to support it. And I got a big question mark in my mind about our ability to maintain long-term, and that's the main concern. I don't have an objection to pay raises. I've never had major pay raises, I've had increments, for the record. But I also, in terms of your leadership position, you have to make sure you have ability to sustain it. And that's a concern. And DOE has prioritized that over many other things. And then we'll come back and we'll say, oh, we need this, 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 and this, but we wanted the pay raise. And so there's the pay raise. You have the pay raise. But the ability now to fund other critical needs of the government, there's the challenge. And I'm bringing this up because the reality is the money may not be there for everything else. So I hope that you keep that in mind. I'm not the senator that's going to sit here and smile and say, don't worry, we got you covered, I'm there for you. Especially if I know that's not the reality. Doesn't make me a popular senator, but that's okay, I can sleep at night.
I would just
I'm
say
going to be
that-
always straightforward, and I just think that's, with considering because you do have the largest budget, there's going to be, you know, the bigger challenge is going to exist for you because of that reality.
It's early in my administration, but I can assure you that I can see places where we can improve efficiencies and get better value for our investment, and that is a top priority. At the end of the day, though, the priority is the service we provide to our students and their families. And so we're going to take a hard look at that. I'm in the process of identifying candidates for the deputy superintendent positions, and there'll be a realignment inside the organization. First of all, I have to look and see what the legal requirements are so that we don't run afoul of the law. But that's on the table. We also know that we have vacant positions, and I'm looking forward to see, do we still need those slots authorized? So that's all on the table for the next several months, and that's where my focus is going to be, because I understand that resources are limited. That's nothing new to me. And I get the power bill too. Wow.
Well, I appreciate hearing that. I certainly look forward to what leadership direction you're going to bring, and definitely, I mean, it's harder to look at how you're going to address cost-cutting measures and effectively still operate, but there's a need for that. I mean, the reality's there, and I know DOE's had to juggle, always had to juggle, and you have the heaviest, you do some of the heaviest lifting. But again, there's not this, and I know some of my colleagues want to, put this perspective that the money's falling from the sky, and because of our greatness, we have to give it to you. Here we are, aren't we wonderful? And that's not the reality. I think we put a lot of, we say a lot of things, and then we don't deliver it, and then we're frustrated and disappointed, and the cycle continues. And I think, as sure-footed as you can move forward and have consistent revenue to take care of the most critical obligations you need, and ultimately, to look at the test scores to make sure that we are graduating students that have the skill set, because we continue to hear from law enforcement in particular that a lot of these applicants just cannot pass basic reading and basic mathematics. And that's concerning, and they're coming out of our public school system. I will make sure my child is well educated, but I'm concerned with many other children out there that are not well educated, and what future does that leave for them? And then our overall government of not having people with the capability and competence to perform and then continue to grow and move in their career. If you don't have a strong foundation, how do you do that? I think we all, those of you that are in education, have a greater understanding of that probably than the rest of us. And that concerns me because, yes, we have to continue to pour more money in, but if the product that's coming out, and I attended 9 years of public school here, most of my education is here, except for my high school years and my graduate school, it's right here on Guam. And it served me well. But when I see young people coming out of the system that can't perform those basic capabilities, or they want to go to the Guam Community College or the University of Guam, and they're having to do basic arithmetic and basic writing skills, and that's what we're producing, another question mark comes in our mind is how well are we serving these children, or are we disserving these children in terms of preparing them for a better future that we all want to see, because our future's in their hands, and if they can't do these basic things, where does that put us as a community?
We're both on the same team with this. Like I said, it's a little early in my time. This is day 9, but
well, I give you credit.
But we will get there. And I am concerned about academic performance, but first we have to get the doors open and the kids into school.
Sure.
And that's taking all of my time and energy right now. And once we get that accomplished, then we'll start into the other part, because the performance and the overall success of our students, graduation is a milestone, but you got to be ready for something after that happens. And that's one of my major concerns. And I've spent 50 years in this profession striving for that kind of success, and we will get there. But it might be a bit bumpy and a little uncomfortable for a few people, but that's just too bad, because we have to take care of the kids first. And by taking care of them, I mean preparing them so that they can go on and pick the field they want to go into and be ready to do it.
Well, thank you. I certainly appreciate your insight this morning, and thank you to your team and members of your board for being here to provide your recommendations and your proposals for your budget. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Blas, save the young senator for last.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Swanson, good morning. Welcome aboard. And I think that the people that are sitting around you know where I'm going to be going with some of my questioning, because they got the smiles on their faces already. First off, the question I have is, in your presentation here, it says that your budget request is for $287,827,644. Is that the number? And I asked that. Go ahead.
The 287 does not include so the way that we submitted the budget was pre the approval of the GPP. So the 287 doesn't include the 7 million for the GPP implementation.
Okay.
So it should be 294.
Because I just wanted to clarify
Correct.
Okay. Dr. Okada's number was that number. Yeah. Was the 294,506. So I just, that I wanted to clear that was the 22%. That's the money you're going to need for the 22%. Before I go into the other question, I need to go back to the line of questioning that was, that my colleagues here, Senator Barnett and Senator Dueñas, had with regard to the $20 million that you were supposed to have received. I wasn't clear. Did you receive, how much have you received of the 20 million?
We have not received any from
So
the
you
20.
received zero.
Correct.
And that money specifically was for what?
For CIP.
Okay. Can we be a little bit more specific as to some of the ideas that you were?
So the original plans with the CIP with the then acting superintendent was to reserve $10 million for a public-private partnership and then to use the remaining balances to support our immediate needs for facilities and maintenance. What was thrust upon us after the typhoon was the immediate response needed for mold remediation, damaged schools, down fencing, some of the water damage from tile. So we put that in, and that's was a 10-10 split from how we were looking at it moving forward to have access to the fund, understanding that if we used that money as a seed money, we would have went through FEMA reimbursements to get it reimbursed.
Okay. And obviously, absent the money, you still need to do the work. Are you doing the work right now?
I believe there's some work that's been engaged, but I don't know the magnitude of what's been completed from, I know that there's been a lot of volunteers assessing the schools and doing their bid to get the debris out of the way, debris removal, some of the hazardous mitigation. And then in terms of the CIP contracts, our current contracts are still moving forward. So there's a little bit of overlap in services, but there is some direct support for the schools.
Okay. And how's that being funded?
Right now, we're getting support through the DLAN to get some of those efforts at the schools, and then from the funding side of some of the contractual support, that's being funded through ARP. The immediate needs for facilities and maintenance, it's also some of the supplies and materials that our maintenance guys are using, that's going to be funded under federal funds as well.
Okay. I'm sure that you've done and released some preliminary damage assessments as a result of the storm. Okay. What are those numbers? What have you found so far as to what's your damage report?
You want to give the like 14?
And I'm asking this because this is factored into the budget.
I always get worried when we throw out projected figures and this is what we're, so just preliminary, and I know Dr. Judy was down here before she left, that number was a little bit over $14 million.
14.
Correct.
Okay. No, I'm not done yet, Mr. Chair. Okay. That's only chapter 1. Okay. Okay, so that, and again, that's preliminarily. Can you probably give me give us a very conservative ballpark figures to what that number would probably be down the road?
So, hi, Joe Sanchez, Deputy Superintendent for Curriculum and Instructional Improvement. Please know that I'm not a finance person, so my numbers are not as accurate as Frank would be. But I do know the process. What we've done is we reviewed all the preliminary damage assessments. The Facilities and Maintenance team and Capital Improvement Project team gave those estimates, as to how much they believe they would cost, and they used previous invoices and previous work that was done in the past to get those estimates. And then what we actually did is we subtracted a lot of the work that's already going to be done under the ARP. So a substantial amount of the challenges are already going to be funded. For example, air conditioning replacement, we didn't count air conditioning replacement because the air conditioners that were blown away are going to be replaced anyway. So you're going to have those. Roofing, there was already leaks and whatnot to the roof and whatnot, so now we just have more leaks. So those are included in the capital improvement projects. Same thing with the canopies. Number of canopies were blown or destroyed, blown away. And since there's already a scope of services for canopies, those were already included. So we actually tried to subtract all of those additional costs that were already being funded, and that's where the $14 million comes from, is all the things that are currently not covered under our federal funding. Now, I do want to say that there's additional, we're looking at our ARP funds to see if we can address some of the other things that came up. So, for example, plumbing, so far plumbing in the ARP was only covered through the restroom. So it's really whatever's in the restroom and everything that happens there. Plumbing and sewage was not included, but there's about 7 schools, I believe, that were earmarked for plumbing damage and issues that need to be addressed. So we're looking for additional funding there. Mold is being addressed again through DLAN, but just in case, quote unquote, we are actually looking at potential funding that might be necessary for mold. I forget, and I'm not sure, Frank, if there's any other areas, but fencing. Fencing was not included as part of our capital improvement project work, but again, we do have a request through DLAN to cover fencing through that $20 million, but also on our end, we're looking at funding on our end just in case that funding does not go through. So we are looking at all of the other items that could be included in that $14 million, but right now that $14 million is our estimate based on everything that's currently not included in our capital improvement projects.
Okay, so Joe, all the other stuff that you didn't include the 14 million, give me a conservative ballpark figure.
That we didn't include? Well, if we did a good job, we should have included everything. So that 14 million estimate is everything that
You
is
just finished
not...
saying that there was some stuff that you didn't include in the 14 million yet.
No, sorry, to clarify, some of the 14 million is comprised of things that we did not include in the original capital improvement projects prior to the typhoon.
Okay, and so, and that those capital improvement projects are those projects that are going to be funded under ARP?
Yes,
ARPA?
yes.
Okay.
Well, some are funded under ESF too, but the COVID funding.
The COVID funding?
Yeah.
ESF 1 is already expired, right?
ESF 1 is all expended.
Okay.
Thanks.
Merit bonuses and increments, where are you at with that?
So merit bonuses have been paid out. We were years outstanding. This year we took the opportunity with our new HR administrator to go back to 2012, and we meant current. So we are current. We're currently getting in the, we went from 2012 to 2022, and we're now in the process of 2023.
Okay.
Increments are current, unless it's current in processing and pay. I know that there may be some employees out there who are pending an evaluation, going through those review mechanisms to get it through HR and approved for payment. So there's always going to be the administrator or division head who's still pending an evaluation and may be behind, but otherwise the department has always been pretty current with addressing its increments.
That's it. When you say current, that's inclusive of the retirees and those who have since separated from GDOE?
Yes, I hope that that's in process. Again, if it's not being processed, then that's an anomaly, not the norm, and we have to look into why they're not being processed, their increments.
Okay. Because, so there's not going to be a need for that to be covered in the budget? You be able to cover that with what you got right now?
Moving forward, we estimate about $1 million to bring, to keep them current for merits.
Okay. How many total employees do you have in GDOE?
So currently, we're about a little bit over 3,500. And those staffing levels, as we go through the process of hiring, are slowly increasing.
How many of those are full-time permanent employees?
So 3,504, so we're upwards, yes.
Pardon me?
3,504 employees are full-time.
Full-time permanent?
Yes.
Okay, do you have any part-time employees?
Limited term, correct.
Limited term full-time, limited term part-time?
Limited term part-time.
Because I'm asking because I got a list and it had 3 different categories. And I'm just wondering if there's any changes in that listing.
So we do have limited term part-time and limited term
There was
full-time.
permanent full-time, there was limited term full-time, and there's limited term part-time.
Correct. That's correct.
Okay, let's go with these numbers again. You have a total number of 3,500 employees, right?
Give me a second to work with Josie to get the specific figures.
Frank, before she speaks, we swear in first, okay? So hold on. She's going to give information only? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
We can't pull those figures from here, so if we can have some time, and then we'll get back to you and give you the confirmation of those figures.
Okay. Then maybe you can clarify for me. You say, so is it correct to say there are 3 different categories of employees that you have within GDOE? Permanent full-time, limited term full-time, and limited term part-time?
Part-time, yes.
So there are 3 different categories? Okay.
Yes.
Can you please explain to me what limited term full-time means?
So generally, limited term full-time, again, limited term is because you're termed. So you're given a specific period of employment. Normally, that's tied to funding and the grant. So limited term full-time is one that will come in from a period of hire to a period of expiration.
Okay.
And likewise, for the other one, it's just part-time when
And
they fall in.
obviously, you're limited term part-time.
Correct.
Okay. So under the rules of the rules and regulations of the government of Guam, your limited term full-time and your limited term part-time are not permanent classified employees, are they?
Yes, you're correct.
Okay. Good. Thank you for opening the door. Because, you know, one of the things that we had in our discussion earlier was that you were using some monies to be able to take care of some of the priorities that were necessary, not just to get the schools in compliance with what has eventually been deemed as Public Law 37-04, okay, but then you also needed to do, because of the damages by Marwar, okay? And that figure right now is close to about $14 million. And right now you're trying to, and you, Mr. Superintendent, welcome to Guam, okay? I'm going to flog a dead horse is what I'm going to be doing at this point in time. Because when you requested for a to change over some of the priorities that you had set out for ESF1 and ESF2 and ARP, you had requested that you move $21 million from mechanical priorities, electrical priorities, plumbing priorities, fire protection priorities, roofing priorities, hardware priorities, surface wall finish priorities, pest control priorities, site priorities, capital improvement plan, contractual management services, small capital improvement plan, contract management services, medium, to include canopies, tables, and chairs. Okay? The money was there earlier, but it was moved. And you know, I remember in the previous testimony, and I didn't bring it up here, but in previous testimony that you guys had all brought, is that one of the reasons why you had difficulty in moving in some of your CIP projects is because you didn't have contract management expertise, you didn't have the people in GDOE, employed in GDOE, to work in those projects. You use that excuse, but in a June 2nd memo that was sent by Mr. Ike Santos to USDOE, you said you didn't need to because you had an existing MOU with other Government of Guam agencies to do that kind of work. And now we have to pay for the work. And I find it very interesting that the amount of money that you need in as far as additional appropriations to be able to take care of some of the projects that you have and some of the things that you need to take care of, you moved them away as priorities. You asked USDOE to say we no longer need this. We no longer need this money in this area because we have arrangements in the way to be able to do this. But now you're coming before us, asking for the same amount of money that you said that you've asked to be transferred, now to be funded locally. Okay. You know, Mr. Cooper Nurse, I'm going to go back to the numbers that you're going to provide to this committee with regard to what the full-time permanent employees are and what.
She
has it.
Yeah, she has it. She'll read it.
What are those numbers?
Senator, my name is Josie Villanueva. I'm the controller for GDOE. As of our current staffing or the extraction from our Tyler Muni system, we have 3,504 employees. As of June 23, that excludes the vacant positions. We have part-time positions of 183, which the breakdown is federal 16 and locally funded 167.
Okay, I apologize. The acoustics in here is not really that well. Okay, so how many permanent full-time employees do you have?
So we have 183 part-time.
183 part-time.
Yes, and permanent full-time would be 3,321.
3,000.
321.
321.
Yeah, that excludes vacant positions or unfilled positions.
Okay. You have permanent full-time? What about permanent limited term?
Does that include vacant position? Did you say that or no? Okay, okay.
No.
Okay. What's your permanent limited term? Or limited term permanent, or whatever you call it. Limited term full-time, I'm sorry.
It's the report that I'm looking at is we're unable to extract that. So there's additional fields that we have to take down to provide that information. We can get back to you on that.
Okay, you can get back to us, okay? But you have, again, there are three classifications. Are you familiar with Public Law 33-123? Which is basically, prohibition on bonus pay for unclassified employees. 33-123. Section 6218.2, prohibition on bonus pay for unclassified employees. No bonuses shall be authorized and or paid in lump sum or otherwise to unclassified employees of the Government of Guam unless specified by law. Any person who authorizes a bonus payment in violation of this section shall be guilty of a misdemeanor. For the purposes of this section, bonuses or bonus payments shall mean sums authorized and or paid to an unclassified employee that is separate and apart from or added to the base salary, the base pay of such unclassified employee for any purpose. So, you had what was deemed to be a superintendent's bonus and retention pay. The law in Guam says you can't pay unclassified employees. What law did you use to pay the bonuses?
So the department staffing pattern consists of classified, right? And you went through the 3,500 of what's classified as limited term part-time, limited term full-time. In terms of the delineation between classified versus unclassified, GDOE carries 4 unclassified employees, the superintendent and the 3 deputies sitting in front of you, and none of us received any type of additional pay or bonus from any.
I just finished asking you minutes earlier, what was the difference in as far as classified and unclassified employees with the Government of Guam? There's no delineation of, there's no separation of what an unclassified or unclassified employee is with the Government of Guam with and that same employee, the Guam Department of Education. Do you offer your limited term full-time employees Government of Guam benefits?
Yes.
Okay. Retirement?
Yes.
That's correct, right?
Do you?
I believe the limited term contribute and they have access to certain benefits. I'm not sure if the retirement is one of them. I have to look into that. Full-time? Limited term full-time, not the part-time. So yeah, based on the work hours, there's different labor laws that afford them what they can earn and what we have to pay them and contribute to.
Okay, and your limited term part-time?
No.
No. Did you in fact provide limited or part-time employees with your superintendent's bonus incentive pay, retention pay?
I would have to go back to the record, Senator, but again, that wasn't a bonus, that was a retention, and some of that retention pay was, again, that was federally funded and asked at a different period. So we do have to look at the record and get the information and make sure that those were in accordance with how it was supposed to be utilized in terms of federally funding those costs.
Yeah, and I bring this up because each in your string of emails and information that you provided to me, the only thing that USDOE says is that if you are so truthful that it is in conformance with Guam law, then you're authorized to do it. But I will tell you that based on what you're providing here and what you provided to USDOE, it's contravention to law. And I'm bringing this up because that is, according to what you said, you guys brought here, it's $9.9 million that we may have to pay back if we were in fact in violation of the law.
Just on that note, again, as this was federally funded, it was asked through USAID, reviewed by consultants. I believe it went through the third party has to be the one to review and pay that expenditure, and they did. So,
But there was nothing here that basically says that you guys were, that you had it in consideration of Guam law that said that you could not pay bonuses or incentive pay.
yeah.
Right? To
I would have to go through that email thread. I
unclassified
believe
employees.
at that point in time, the grant was, again, I don't see all the level of correspondence.
So
of
it
that.
is your saying that, telling me that limited term full-time employees are classified employees of the government of Guam? Yes, no,
No, limited term,
full-time employees.
limited term full-time employees.
Yeah, are they classified employees of the government of Guam?
See, that's a definition. So in terms of that, I would have to have HR clarify that for the record on how we treat them, because they're entitled to certain benefits and pay. And I think they're treated in a way that there's not discriminatory practices towards what they're able to benefit from in terms of employment status.
I just don't want a $9.9 million payback, okay, or receipt come back from USDOE says we have to pay this.
Senator, I thank you for that, and I share your same concern. If there is a payback under the way that this was processed, it'll be the third party who made the reimbursement and processed.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was fully federally funded. There's no local dollars attached to any of the retention incentive. And again, that was given at a time of the height of COVID, where the superintendent, and I believe he worked with his counterparts and other superintendents and was getting guidance on how to facilitate in-person, the return to in-person. And one of the things that other states were doing was having different incentive programs to make sure that they can keep their people around. At that point in time, there was a lot of uncertainty. We're seeing different school districts not only being shut down, but not having the necessary support or work staff to go back because there were high concerns. So the USAID, through the department, gave these fundings.
I appreciate that, and I thank you for the information, because you guys, GDOE did provide examples of other places that actually used this money to provide that kind of pay. But if you had done your research even more, you would have found that a lot of all these jurisdictions that did this under the guise of there was an ordinance or there was a law that allowed them to do this. If you can recall, when we were having this conversation last year, I had asked you under what legal authority, and the only thing that you can provide to me was a memo. There was a memo that authorized it. It wasn't authorized by law. So therefore, my concern that we have here, and if you read this, had there been an executive order that provided it, an executive order carries the same effect of law. But there was no executive order. There was no order, as a matter of fact, that gave the bonuses or the teachers' pay. And now this is going to bite us in the butt. So, Mr. Chair, you look at this and you're $294 million may have to go up another $9.9 million. I'm sorry, Mr. Swanson, but okay, you can have that meeting with them after we're done here, okay? Thank you, Mr. Chair, appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator Blas. I just throw that back at the third-party fiduciary party to handle. Senator Kenneth, do you have any questions or comments for the panel?
I did have questions, but I think my colleagues already exhausted them. I'll just have to go back and do some homework. Unfortunately, I had to step away. But certainly wanted to congratulate Mr. Swanson on your new job. I wish you all the best on the future days. I think it's an uphill battle for you, but I think you have a team that will help guide you through these upcoming challenging times. And President Okada is a very great role model, so I hope she can help support you in all your future endeavors as the chair of the DOE board. And Ms. Maria Gutierrez, well, I'm very sure will be at your front desk every day to make sure you're accountable. So with that being said, I wish you guys all the best. We really want to see all the best come out of all our hearings and the oversights of your oversight chair. But we just gotta find progress of all the challenges we're seeing. That's all I'm asking. My office stands ready to support in whatever way needed. But again, nothing but the best for you guys. Okay, thank you. Welcome aboard again, Mr. Swanson.
Thank you, Senator Canata. Dr. Swanson, do you have anything to say while we're ready to close this budget hearing? This budget hearing.
Just very briefly, this has been a very enlightening encounter. I do appreciate the candor from the senators, and I'm also here to assure you that my effort is to support the intent of the law and deliver the best possible program for our students, the cooperation and support of our board. And I will be leaning on Dr. Okada's experience quite heavily because she knows the ins and outs of how to do things here that are totally foreign to my experience, although I have spent a number of years here earlier. And we're happy to be here, and I really am energized by the work that's ahead of us. I look forward to working with all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Swanson. With that, there being no one else to give any testimony on the budget, on this budget hearing, the committee will close this hearing. I'd like to thank everyone for attending this hearing and for providing feedback and suggestion. Guam Department of Education budget hearing is now adjourned. The time now is 11:15. Si Zeus Masi, and please be safe. Thank you, Frank. Take care.